In the desolate wilderness of Alaska's remote Kenai Peninsula, Sarah Mitchell's serene February dawn transformed into a moment that would challenge everything humanity thought they knew about the bonds between humans and wild animals. The brutal winter storm that had swept through the region overnight plunged temperatures to a bone-shattering -50 degrees Fahrenheit. But it wasn't the historic cold that made Sarah's steaming mug of chamomile tea crash to her cabin floor. It was the heart-wrenching scene unfolding outside her frost-encrusted window, a scene that would soon become the most extraordinary wildlife encounter ever documented in North American history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had chosen this isolated life deliberately, trading her bustling career as a wildlife photographer in Seattle for the raw authenticity of Alaska's untamed wilderness. Her small log cabin, perched on the edge of a pristine lake and surrounded by towering spruce trees, had become her sanctuary over the past 3 years. Each morning she would wake before sunrise, wrap herself in her father's old wool sweater, and watch the wilderness come alive through her camera lens. But this morning was different. This morning would test not just her courage, but humanity's understanding of wild animal consciousness. The wind howled through the valley with an almost supernatural intensity, driving sheets of snow against her windows with such force that the glass seemed to vibrate. The weather alert on her satellite phone had warned of an unprecedented Arctic, a blast, but nothing could have prepared her for the severity of this storm. The temperature reading on her weather station had dropped so low that she had to check it twice, convinced it must be malfunctioning. But it was the massive shape emerging from the swirling snow that made her blood freeze in her veins. Through the thickening frost on her window, Sarah could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a mother grizzly bear, her fur crusted with ice and snow, moving with a desperation that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. February was deep hibernation season. No bear should be active, let alone approaching a human dwelling. Something was terribly wrong. As the bear drew closer, Sarah's trained photographer's eye caught details that sent chills down her spine. The bear's movements weren't aggressive or predatory. They were calculated, almost human-like in their deliberation. Her massive frame swayed with exhaustion, and her eyes held an intelligence that seemed to transcend the natural order. But it was what the bear carried in her powerful jaws that made Sarah's heart nearly stop. A tiny cub, its fur crystallized, with ice, its small body completely still. The mother bear's approach to Sarah's cabin defied every protocol, every wildlife behavior pattern Sarah had studied in her 15 years as a photographer. Instead of displaying the typical, cautious aggression of a mother bear with young, this magnificent creature moved with an almost supernatural awareness. She carefully placed her lifeless cub in the snow beneath Sarah's window, and then did something that would soon be discussed in wildlife research centers across the globe. The bear raised herself to her full height, placing both front paws against Sarah's window, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a powerful predator. But it wasn't this action alone that made Sarah question everything she thought she knew about wildlife behavior. It was the bear's eyes that locked onto Sarah's with an awareness that transcended species, eyes that carried a message so clear and desperate that it shattered every scientific principle about animal consciousness. As Sarah stood transfixed, The mother bear began a series of deliberate movements that would later be studied by wildlife experts worldwide. She alternated between checking her motionless cub and making gestures at the window that seemed to defy explanation. Each movement was purposeful, each gesture laden with meaning. She would point to her cub, then to Sarah's door, then press her paw against the glass in a way that could only be described as pleading. The brutal wind continued to intensify, driving the temperature even lower. Ice crystals formed on the cub's fur with frightening speed, and the mother bear's actions became increasingly desperate. She began making sounds that Sarah, with all her experience in wildlife photography, had never heard before, sounds that seemed to bridge the gap between animal and human communication. Sarah's satellite phone buzzed with another emergency. Weather alert, warning of even colder temperatures approaching. The mother bear's behavior became more urgent, more focused. She gathered her cub closer, trying to shield it from the lethal cold. But Sarah could see it wasn't enough. The tiny creature's breathing was becoming shallow, its small body growing stiffer with each passing minute. The scene that unfolded next would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about animal intelligence. The mother bear, seemingly understanding that time was running out, began a series of actions so deliberate, so calculated, that they seemed impossible for a creature governed purely by instinct. She cleared a small patch of snow in front of Sarah's window and began making marks. Not random scratches, but organized patterns that appeared to be an attempt at communication. Sarah watched in astonishment as the bear repeated these patterns, each time looking directly at her with an intensity that seemed to carry a clear message. Her cub was dying, and she was turning to a human, her natural adversary, as a last desperate hope for salvation. The intelligence and awareness displayed in these actions would later become the subject of countless scientific studies and debates about animal consciousness. The mother bear's desperation reached new heights as her cub's condition deteriorated further. She began a series of behaviors that would later be analyzed by animal behaviorists around the world. Standing upright, she pressed both paws against the window in a perfect mirror of human hands, begging for mercy, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The gesture was so human-like, so heart-wrenchingly clear in its meaning, that Sarah felt tears freezing on her cheeks. The wind's howl rose to a deafening crescendo, and the mother bear's actions took on a new urgency. She alternated between attempting to warm her cub and making increasingly complex gestures at the window. Each movement seemed more deliberate than the last, each action more clearly communicative. She would press her paw against the glass, then point to her cub, then make a clear motion toward Sarah's door, a sequence so purposeful it could only be an attempt at communication. As Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing with the impossibility of what she was witnessing, the mother bear made one final heartbreaking attempt to convey her desperate situation. She gently lifted her dying cub, held it directly against the window, and made a sound that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life, a sound that carried all the anguish of a mother watching her child slip away. The brutal storm showed no signs of relenting, and Sarah knew that every passing second brought the cub closer to death. The mother bear, seeming to sense the urgency of the situation, began what appeared to be a final plea. She bowed her head in complete submission, a behavior unheard of in wild bears, and then raised her eyes to meet Sarah's with a look that contained such clear intelligence, such obvious understanding of her dire situation, that it would force scientists to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about animal consciousness. Time seemed to stand still in that frozen moment, as Sarah found herself faced with a decision that would challenge every protocol, every safety guideline, and every wildlife interaction rule she had learned throughout her career. The mother bear's intelligent eyes remained locked on hers, carrying a depth of understanding that defied scientific explanation. But it was the barely perceptible rise and fall of the cub's chest, growing weaker with each passing second, that finally spurred Sarah into action. Drawing upon her years of wildlife photography experience, Sarah began to catalogue the bear's behavior with an expert's eye, even as her heart raced with the unprecedented nature of the situation. The mother bear's posture was completely non-threatening. Shoulders relaxed, head slightly lowered, maintaining a respectful distance from the window. These were not the actions of a desperate predator, but rather those of a conscious being, seeking help with extraordinary awareness. Sarah's mind raced through her extensive knowledge of bear behavior. In all her years documenting wildlife, she had never encountered anything remotely similar to this. Bears in February should be deep in hibernation, their metabolism slowed to a crawl in their winter dens. Something catastrophic must have driven this mother and cub from their shelter. Perhaps an avalanche or predator had destroyed their den, forcing them out into this lethal cold. The satellite phone on her counter buzzed again, this time with a message from the National Weather Service warning of an incoming polar vortex that would drive temperatures even lower. Sarah glanced at her equipment. Her cameras were already recording this extraordinary encounter, capturing footage that would soon become the subject of intense scientific study. But documentation wasn't enough. She knew she had to act. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As if sensing Sarah's internal struggle, the mother bear's behavior shifted into an even more astonishing display of intelligence. She began what appeared to be a deliberate demonstration of her understanding of the situation. First, she carefully cleaned her cub's fur of snow, her movements gentle and precise. Then, with actions that seemed impossible for a wild animal, she appeared to inspect her cub's vital signs, pressing her nose to its chest and letting out a soft whimper that carried clearly through the thick glass. The wind outside had reached a fevered pitch, driving the wind chill to levels that would be lethal to any exposed creature within minutes. The mother bear's fur was completely crusted with ice, yet she seemed focused entirely on her cub's survival rather than her own comfort. Her dedication was a testament to the universal power of maternal love, transcending the boundaries between species. Sarah's experience with wildlife had taught her to recognize signs of aggression or threat, but what she witnessed now was something entirely different. The mother bear's eyes held an awareness that went beyond mere animal intelligence. There was a consciousness there, an understanding that seemed to bridge the gap between wild and human minds. Each gesture, each movement, was infused with purpose and meaning. The bear's attempts at communication grew more sophisticated. She began making marks in the snow, not random scratches, but organized patterns that appeared to have deliberate meaning. She would make a mark, Look at Sarah, then point to her cub. The sequence was repeated with such precision that it could only be intentional. This display of symbolic thinking would later become the subject of numerous scientific papers on animal intelligence. Sarah's cabin, typically a haven of solitude, had become the stage for what might be the most significant human-wildlife interaction ever documented. The mother bear's behavior continued to defy every known principle of animal behavior. She maintained a perfect balance between showing her desperate need for help and demonstrating that she posed no threat. A level of social awareness that should have been impossible for a wild animal. The cub's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Its small body had stopped shivering, a deadly sign in hypothermia cases. The mother bear's response to this development was heartbreaking in its humanity. She gathered her cub closer, trying to share her body heat, all while maintaining eye contact with Sarah. The intelligence and desperation in her gaze seemed to carry a clear message. Time was running out. Sarah's wildlife photography had taken her to some of the most remote corners of the world, allowing her to witness extraordinary moments of natural behavior. But nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for this level of apparent consciousness in a wild animal. The mother bear's actions suggested not just intelligence, but a sophisticated understanding of human behavior and social interaction. As the storm intensified, the bear began what appeared to be a final plea. She carefully placed her cub in the snow, then performed a series of gestures that left Sarah questioning everything she thought she knew about wildlife behavior. The bear pointed to Sarah's door, made a clear opening motion with her paws, then bowed her head in complete submission. The message was unmistakable. She was placing her trust and her cub's life entirely in Sarah's hands. The implications of what Sarah was witnessing were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was something that would force scientists to reconsider their entire understanding of animal consciousness. The mother bear's actions displayed a level of reasoning and communication that went far beyond what current scientific knowledge suggested was possible. Sarah watched as the mother bear made one final, devastating attempt to save her cub. With movements that seemed to carry all the weight of maternal anguish, she pressed her forehead against the window, raised both paws in what looked remarkably like a prayer gesture, and let out a sound that seemed to bridge the gap between species. A sound that carried all the desperation of a mother watching her child slip away. The brutal wind continued to drive sheets of snow against the cabin, and the cub's breathing grew more labored. The mother bear's eyes met Sarah's one final time, holding a question that demanded an immediate answer. In that moment, Sarah realized she was standing at a crossroads, not just in her own life, but in our understanding of the relationship between humans and wildlife. As a wildlife photographer, Sarah had always maintained a professional distance from her subjects, following the cardinal rule of never interfering with nature's course. But as she stood there, watching this extraordinary display of maternal love and intelligence, she understood that sometimes the greatest acts of nature conservation come from following one's heart rather than rigid rules. The mother bear, seeming to sense that a crucial moment had arrived, made one final gesture that would be analyzed by experts for years to come. She placed her massive paw against the window with such gentleness that it barely made a sound, then lowered her head in what could only be described as a bow. This display of trust and submission from one of nature's most powerful predators defied every natural law. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, her breath creating small clouds in the increasingly cold air of her cabin. Years of wildlife training screamed at her to stop, to maintain the barrier between human and wild spaces, but something deeper, more primal, pushed her forward. The mother bear's eyes followed her movement with an awareness that transcended species, showing not just intelligence, but a profound understanding of the gravity of this moment. As Sarah's fingers touched the cold metal of the handle, memories of her own mother flashed through her mind. 20 years ago, on a similarly brutal winter night, her mother had driven through a blizzard to reach a remote clinic when Sarah had developed a dangerous fever. That same fierce maternal instinct now reflected in the bear's eyes, bridging the gap between their worlds. The door creaked open just enough to reach the dying cub, releasing a blast of Arctic air that instantly crystallized Sarah's eyelashes. But before she could move, the mother bear did something that would revolutionize scientific understanding of wildlife behavior. With movements that displayed impossible restraint and awareness, she carefully lifted her cub, approached the door, with slow, deliberate steps, and with a gentleness that seemed to defy her wild nature, placed her baby just inside the threshold. The bear's next actions left Sarah rooted to the spot, her photographer's mind automatically documenting every extraordinary detail. Instead of following her cub inside, a natural instinct that should have been overpowering, the mother bear backed away several steps, lowered her head in a clear display of submission, and waited. The level of trust and understanding shown in this simple act would later become the subject of countless scientific debates. Sarah's cabin, normally organized with the precision of a professional photographer's studio, now became an impromptu wildlife rescue center. Her mind raced through everything she knew about treating hypothermia, both in humans and animals. The cub's small body was dangerously cold, its breathing shallow and irregular. Years of observing wildlife had taught her the signs of critical condition, and this tiny creature was displaying all of them. Outside, the mother bear's behavior continued to shatter every preconception about wildlife intelligence. She made a series of gestures that could only be described as communication, pointing to her cub, then to the warmth of the cabin, all while maintaining a respectful distance. Her understanding of the situation seemed to go beyond mere instinct, suggesting a level of cognitive ability that science had never attributed to wild animals. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she gathered supplies, warm towels, her emergency medical kit, the heating pad she kept for her own muscle aches after long days in the field. Her years of wildlife photography had given her an intimate knowledge of bear anatomy, but this was different. This wasn't about documentation, it was about survival. The mother bear's reaction to Sarah's movements was extraordinary. Instead of showing anxiety or aggression at seeing a human handle her cub, she watched with what could only be described as attentive cooperation. When Sarah gently began warming the cub's extremities, the mother bear made soft, encouraging sounds that seemed to transcend the language barrier between species. As Sarah worked to save the cub's life, she found herself speaking softly, explaining each action to the mother bear. To her amazement, the massive creature appeared to be listening intently, her eyes following Sarah's every movement with an understanding that seemed impossible for a wild animal. This wasn't just unusual behavior. This was something that would challenge the very foundations of what science thought possible. The wind outside reached a new level of fury, rattling the cabin's windows with explosive force. But inside, a miracle of trust and cooperation was unfolding. The cub's temperature slowly began to rise, its breathing becoming stronger and more regular. Each positive sign was met with reactions from the mother bear that displayed an almost human-like awareness of the situation's progress. Sarah's satellite phone buzzed again. Another weather alert, this one warning of the worst conditions in recorded history. But the message also contained something that made her heart skip. The nearest wildlife rescue center had been forced to evacuate due to the storm. She and this extraordinary bear family were completely on their own. The mother bear's response to her cub's gradual recovery defied every natural instinct. Instead of growing more protective or aggressive as her cub showed signs of life, she maintained a remarkable calm, watching Sarah's medical interventions with what appeared to be complete trust. This level of social awareness and cooperation would later force scientists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about animal consciousness. As warmth returned to the cub's small body, Sarah observed behaviors that would fill pages of scientific journals. The mother bear began what appeared to be a deliberate demonstration of gratitude. She would make eye contact with Sarah, then bow her head in a clear gesture of thanks, repeating this sequence with a precision that suggested genuine understanding rather than coincidence. The storm continued to intensify outside, but within the cabin an extraordinary bond was forming. The mother bear's behavior suggested not just intelligence, but emotional awareness that went far beyond current scientific understanding. She seemed to recognize not only that Sarah was helping, but the specific ways in which she was doing so. Sarah's wildlife photography had captured countless intimate moments in nature, but nothing compared to this. The mother bear's eyes held a depth of awareness that challenged everything she thought she knew about the barrier between human and animal consciousness. This wasn't just an animal seeking shelter. This was a sentient being demonstrating levels of trust and understanding that should have been impossible. As the cub's condition stabilized, the mother bear began what appeared to be a series of teaching moments. She would make specific sounds to her cub, then gesture towards Sarah as if explaining to her baby that this human was a friend, not a threat. The sophistication of this behavior would later become the subject of extensive research into animal communication and social learning. The next few hours unfolded like a dream, each moment bringing new revelations about the depths of animal intelligence. The mother bear maintained a perfect balance between protecting her cub and showing gratitude to Sarah, her behavior displaying a level of social awareness that would force scientists to rewrite textbooks on animal cognition. Sarah's cabin, usually filled with the quiet clicks of camera equipment, now resonated with the soft sounds of interspecies cooperation. The mother bear's occasional gentle rumbles seemed to carry specific meanings, her gestures and movements, suggesting a complex form of communication that bridged the gap between their worlds. As the day progressed, Sarah witnessed behaviors that would challenge every accepted principle of wildlife interaction. The mother bear began what appeared to be deliberate attempts to communicate not just needs and gratitude, but complex ideas. She would make specific gestures, wait for Sarah's acknowledgement, then repeat or modify them based on the response. a level of symbolic thinking previously thought impossible in non-human species. The cub's recovery continued to progress in ways that would astound the medical community. Under Sarah's careful attention and the mother bear's watchful eyes, the tiny creature's vital signs strengthened hour by hour. What made this healing process extraordinary wasn't just the medical aspects, but the unprecedented level of cooperation between human and bear that seemed to transcend the laws of nature itself. Sarah's background in wildlife observation proved invaluable, as she noticed subtle signs of improvement that others might have missed. The cub's breathing pattern shifted from shallow and irregular to deep and steady. Its small paws began to twitch, then flex, signs of returning circulation that brought visible relief to both Sarah and the mother bear. Each positive development was met with what could only be described as conscious acknowledgement from the mother bear. As the cub grew stronger, it began displaying behaviors that would later captivate wildlife behaviorists worldwide. Instead of showing fear or aggression towards Sarah, natural reactions for a wild animal, it exhibited a level of trust that seemed to mirror its mother's. The tiny creature would track Sarah's movements with curious eyes, responding to her voice, with soft chirps that suggested not just recognition, but comfort in her presence. The mother bear's behavior during this recovery period defied every known principle of wildlife interaction. She maintained a careful vigilance over her cub, while simultaneously demonstrating an extraordinary awareness of Sarah's space and boundaries. When Sarah needed to check the cub's temperature or adjust its position, the mother bear would move back slightly, creating a perfect balance between protective instinct and cooperative trust. Outside, the storm had transformed the Alaskan wilderness into an otherworldly landscape. Snow accumulated in massive drifts against the cabin walls, and the wind's howl had become a constant companion to their extraordinary sanctuary. But within these walls, something miraculous was taking place, a cooperation between species that would challenge humanity's understanding of wildlife consciousness. Sarah's satellite phone had stopped receiving signals hours ago, cutting off their last link to the outside world. Yet this isolation seemed fitting, as if the universe had created a private space for this unprecedented encounter to unfold. The mother bear's occasional glances at the device suggested an awareness of its importance, another sign of her remarkable intelligence. As warmth and strength returned to the cub's body, it began attempting to stand. Each wobbly effort was supported by its mother in ways that displayed not just parental care, but an understanding of rehabilitation principles that seemed impossible for a wild animal. She would gently support her cub's weight, gradually reducing assistance as its strength returned, a technique remarkably similar to physical therapy practices. Sarah's professional camera continued to document every moment, capturing evidence that would soon revolutionize our understanding of animal intelligence. The mother bear's reactions to being photographed showed an awareness that went beyond mere curiosity. She would occasionally pose, holding positions that offered clear views of her interactions with her cub, as if understanding the importance of documenting their extraordinary encounter. The cabin's warming air carried the mingled scents of wet fur, brewing tea, and the lingering aroma of Sarah's forgotten breakfast. These ordinary smells seemed to ground the extraordinary events unfolding within these walls. The mother bear's occasional deep breaths and relaxed posture suggested she found comfort in these domestic scents, another surprising indication of her adaptation to human space. As the day progressed, Sarah observed behaviors that would fill volumes of scientific research. The mother bear began what appeared to be deliberate demonstrations of social etiquette. She would make eye contact before moving, wait for acknowledgement before approaching her cub, and maintain what seemed to be a conscious awareness of appropriate spatial boundaries, behaviors that suggested an understanding of human social norms that should have been impossible for a wild animal. The cub's increasing mobility brought new challenges and revelations. As it began exploring its temporary shelter, the mother bear displayed an extraordinary level of awareness regarding human belongings. She would gently redirect her cub from Sarah's camera equipment or personal items, showing an understanding of property boundaries that defied explanation. These weren't just protective instincts. These were conscious choices that demonstrated remarkable social awareness. Sarah's years of wildlife photography had taught her to recognize the subtle nuances of animal behavior, but what she witnessed now went beyond anything in her experience. The mother bear's actions suggested not just intelligence, but a form of emotional wisdom. When the cub showed signs of distress, she would comfort it with gentle touches and soft sounds, but she would also look to Sarah for reassurance, a three-way communication that bridged the gap between species. The storm outside had reached historic proportions, with wind gusts strong enough to shake the cabin's sturdy frame. Yet inside, an atmosphere of calm prevailed. The mother bear's occasional glances at the windows carried what seemed to be conscious gratitude for their shelter. Her body language relaxed despite the raging elements outside. As the cub grew stronger, it began displaying behaviors that mirrored both its mother's and, surprisingly, Sarah's. It would watch their interactions intently, then attempt to copy certain gestures, a form of social learning that suggested a level of cognitive development far beyond what science had previously attributed to bear cubs. This wasn't just mimicry, it was conscious observation and adaptation. The mother bear's response to her cub's improving condition showed a sophistication of emotion that would challenge scientific understanding. She maintained a perfect balance between encouraging independence and providing support, her actions suggesting a deep understanding of the recovery process. When the cub successfully took its first steady steps, her reaction was a complex mixture of pride, relief, and what appeared to be gratitude towards Sarah. Sarah's cabin had become more than just a shelter. It had transformed into a sacred space where the boundaries between human and wild dissolved. The mother bear's occasional soft vocalizations seemed to carry specific meanings, creating what felt like a new language born of necessity and trust. Each gesture, each sound, added to a growing dictionary of interspecies communication that would later fascinate linguists and animal behaviorists alike. As the day wore on, the mother bear began what appeared to be deliberate efforts to give back to their temporary sanctuary. She would carefully clean up any mess her cub made, gather their shed fur into neat piles, and maintain what seemed to be a conscious awareness of the cabin's cleanliness. These weren't just instinctive behaviors. They suggested a level of social reciprocity that defied current understanding of wildlife behavior. The cub's recovery had progressed from critical to stable, but the mother bear showed no signs of rushing their departure. Instead, she seemed to understand the importance of full recovery, watching her cub's progress with what appeared to be medical awareness. She would test its strength with gentle exercises, assess its balance with careful attention, and look to Sarah for confirmation of its improving condition. As the sun began its slow descent behind the Alaskan mountains, casting long shadows through Sarah's frost-covered windows, The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted to something even more extraordinary. The mother bear's behavior evolved into what could only be described as preparation for their eventual departure. But her methods displayed a level of forethought and consideration that would challenge scientific understanding for years to come. The cub, now steady on its feet and showing remarkable recovery, had begun to exhibit behaviors that suggested not just physical healing, but emotional and social development far beyond what should have been possible in such a short time. It would occasionally approach Sarah's photography equipment with careful curiosity, stopping at a respectful distance as if understanding the value and fragility of human tools. This wasn't just learned behavior from its mother, it showed an independent understanding of human space and boundaries. Sarah's cameras continued to capture every moment of this unprecedented encounter, documenting what would become groundbreaking evidence of animal consciousness. The mother bear's awareness of being recorded seemed to grow more sophisticated. She would position herself and her cub in ways that offered clear views of their interactions, sometimes even pausing during particularly significant moments, as if ensuring they were properly documented for future study. The storm outside had begun to show signs of weakening, its howling voice dropping to a lower register. The mother bear's reactions to these changes demonstrated an understanding of weather patterns that went beyond mere instinct. She would cock her head at certain changes in the wind's pitch, her eyes showing clear comprehension of what these shifts meant for their journey home. During a particularly quiet moment, Sarah witnessed something that would later become the centerpiece of numerous scientific papers on animal intelligence. The mother bear began what appeared to be a deliberate teaching session with her cub. Using a fallen piece of paper and her claws, she demonstrated how to mark simple patterns, circles and lines that bore an uncanny resemblance to basic writing. The cub watched with focused attention, then attempted to replicate the marks, showing a level of symbolic understanding that should have been impossible for a wild animal. Sarah's expertise in wildlife behavior had taught her to recognize the signs of animals preparing to return to the wild, but what she observed now defied all conventional knowledge. The mother bear began a series of what appeared to be practice sessions with her cub, teaching it not just survival skills, but what looked remarkably like social etiquette. She would demonstrate proper distances to maintain from human structures, how to communicate non-aggression, and most surprisingly, how to express gratitude through specific gestures. The cub's response to these lessons showed an intelligence that went far beyond basic learning. It would watch its mother's demonstrations, attempt to replicate them, and then look to both its mother and Sarah for approval. This three-way social interaction suggested a level of cognitive development that would force scientists to reconsider their understanding of animal consciousness. As the day progressed, the mother bear's preparation for departure took on an almost ceremonial quality. She began gathering small objects from around the cabin, a fallen leaf, a tiny pine cone, a small smooth stone, arranging them in what appeared to be deliberate patterns near the door. This wasn't just random collection, it suggested an understanding of symbolic representation and possibly even gift-giving behavior. Sarah's satellite phone suddenly crackled to life, receiving its first signal in hours. The mother bear's reaction to this development showed remarkable awareness. She turned her attention to the device, then to the windows, seeming to understand that this connection to the outside world meant changes were coming. Her subsequent actions displayed a level of emotional intelligence that would astound behavioral experts. The bear began what appeared to be a farewell ritual, but one that showed sophisticated understanding of human customs. She guided her cub through a series of behaviors that mimicked human social conventions, maintaining eye contact, showing respect for personal space, and even what appeared to be attempts at expressing gratitude through specific gestures. The cub, following its mother's example, began its own preparations for departure. Its movements showed not just physical recovery, but a newfound awareness of its surroundings. It would carefully step around Sarah's belongings, pause to acknowledge her presence with gentle chirps, and maintain what appeared to be conscious awareness of appropriate boundaries. These weren't just learned behaviors. They suggested a deep understanding of social interaction. Outside, the storm's fury had diminished to occasional gusts, revealing patches of clear sky through the cabin's windows. The mother bear's attention to these weather changes showed remarkable strategic thinking. She would study the sky, test the wind's direction with her nose, and make what appeared to be calculated decisions about timing. This wasn't just animal instinct, it was conscious planning for safe travel. Sarah's years of wildlife observation had given her an intimate understanding of animal behavior, but what she witnessed now transcended all professional knowledge. The mother bear began what appeared to be a structured farewell ceremony, incorporating elements that suggested deep understanding of human ritual and symbolism. She would make specific gestures, wait for acknowledgement, then guide her cub to do the same, creating a complex dance of interspecies communication. The combination of the cub's physical recovery and apparent cognitive development created a scene that would challenge scientific understanding of wildlife behavior. Together, mother and cub demonstrated levels of social awareness, emotional intelligence, and symbolic thinking that went far beyond what current science believed possible. Their coordinated movements and shared awareness suggested not just family bonds, but a sophisticated understanding of social interaction that bridged the gap between species. As the light began to fade, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, the mother bear's preparations took on a new dimension. She began what appeared to be a final lesson for her cub, demonstrating behaviors that would ensure safe future interactions with humans. This wasn't just survival training. It was a complex transmission of social knowledge that suggested deep understanding of cross-species relationships. The cub's grasp of these lessons showed remarkable sophistication. It would practice approaching and retreating from human spaces, demonstrate non-threatening body language, and even attempt to replicate its mother's more complex communication gestures. Each successful attempt was met with gentle encouragement from both its mother and, remarkably, seemed to seek approval from Sarah as well. Sarah's documentation of these final hours would later provide groundbreaking insights into animal intelligence and consciousness. The mother bear's deliberate, measured preparations for departure showed levels of planning and social awareness that would force scientists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about wildlife behavior. This wasn't just an animal preparing to leave. This was a conscious being engaging in complex social rituals. The approaching sunset brought with it a sense of finality, but also of profound transformation. The mother bear's behavior suggested not just preparation for departure, but an understanding of the historic nature of their encounter. She would occasionally pause in her preparations to make eye contact with Sarah, her gaze carrying what seemed to be conscious acknowledgement of their shared experience. The final moments of this extraordinary encounter began to unfold with a grace that seemed orchestrated by nature itself. As the storm's fury finally subsided, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine snow and ice crystal clarity, Sarah witnessed what would become the most profound demonstration of animal consciousness ever recorded. The mother bear's preparation for their final departure transcended mere animal behavior, evolving into a ceremony that would challenge humanity's understanding of wildlife intelligence for generations to come. The mother bear initiated what appeared to be a deliberate farewell ritual, but one that incorporated elements so sophisticated it would later leave scientists questioning everything they thought they knew about animal cognition. Standing at her full height, she began a series of movements that seemed to combine traditional bear body language with learned human gestures, creating a new form of communication that bridged the gap between their species. With movements that displayed impossible grace for such a powerful creature, the mother bear began gathering small tokens from their shared experience. A few strands of her fur, a small piece of the towel that had helped warm her cub, and remarkably, one perfect snowflake that had drifted through the now open door. She arranged these items with deliberate care near Sarah's feet, creating a pattern that resembled a simple but unmistakable heart shape. The cub, now fully recovered and moving with confident strength, followed its mother's example, but added its own touching variation. It carefully approached Sarah's camera equipment, which had documented their entire extraordinary encounter, and placed a small, smooth stone beside it, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge the importance of preserving their shared story for others to learn from. Sarah's years of wildlife photography had taught her to maintain professional distance, but what she witnessed now broke through every barrier of scientific objectivity. The mother bear began what appeared to be a teaching session, not just for her cub, but seemingly for Sarah as well. Through a series of deliberate demonstrations, she showed how to interpret subtle changes in bear body language, creating what felt like a manual for future human-wildlife interaction. The most extraordinary moment came when the mother bear approached Sarah's desk, where her wildlife journals lay open. With a gentleness that seemed impossible for her massive paws, she pointed to different sketches of bears that Sarah had drawn, then performed the behaviors illustrated, creating a real-time demonstration of bear communication patterns. This wasn't just mimicry. This was conscious teaching, suggesting a level of metacognition previously thought impossible in non-human species. As the fading light painted the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, the mother bear began preparing her cub for their journey home. But rather than simply leaving, she engaged in what appeared to be a complex goodbye ceremony. She would guide her cub through a series of movements that seemed to combine traditional bear behaviors with newly learned human gestures, creating a hybrid language that spoke of gratitude, respect, and understanding. The cub's participation in this farewell ritual showed remarkable sophistication. It would pause at specific points in the cabin, acknowledging spaces where significant moments had occurred, where it had first received warmth, where it had taken its first recovered steps, where it had learned to trust a human touch. Each pause was accompanied by a gentle dip of its head, a gesture that seemed to carry deep understanding of the significance of these locations. Sarah's satellite phone had begun receiving clear signals again, bringing news that the historic storm was finally passing. The mother bear's reaction to these changes showed remarkable awareness of their situation. She began what appeared to be a timekeeping gesture, looking at the changing light outside, then to Sarah, then to her cub, coordinating their departure with the improving weather conditions. The most profound moment came when the mother bear approached Sarah one final time. Instead of displaying the caution typical of wild animals, she demonstrated a level of trust that would redefine our understanding of wildlife consciousness. With movements that seemed choreographed by a higher intelligence, she gently took Sarah's hand in her massive paw, held it for a moment in what felt like a formal handshake, then guided her cub to do the same. As they prepared to step out into the transformed landscape, the mother bear did something that would be studied by wildlife experts for years to come. She began what appeared to be a deliberate demonstration of how she wanted to be remembered. She would make a specific gesture, wait for Sarah to photograph it, then repeat it with subtle variations, as if creating a dictionary of bear-human communication for future reference. The cub, watching its mother with obvious understanding, began adding its own entries to this impromptu language guide. It would demonstrate behaviors that showed clear intention, how to request help, how to show gratitude, how to communicate peaceful intentions. Each demonstration was followed by a pause, ensuring that Sarah's cameras captured every detail. The mother bear's final preparations showed remarkable awareness of human customs and comfort. She carefully cleaned any marks their presence had left, gathered shed fur into neat piles, and even attempted to return furniture to its original positions. This wasn't just instinctive tidying. This was conscious consideration of human living spaces, suggesting a level of social awareness that went far beyond current scientific understanding. As the moment of departure drew near, the mother bear engaged in what appeared to be a final teaching session, but this one seemed aimed at a broader audience. She would demonstrate a behavior, wait for Sarah to photograph it, then point to her cub and the outside world, as if creating a guide for future generations of both species on how to interact with respect and understanding. The cub's grasp of these lessons showed remarkable sophistication. It would practice each new behavior until it achieved a level of precision that suggested not just learning, but conscious understanding of the importance of clear communication between species. Its eyes would frequently meet Sarah's, showing an awareness that seemed to transcend the natural boundaries between human and wild. As they finally moved toward the door, the mother bear orchestrated a departure that would challenge every preconception about wildlife behavior. She created what appeared to be a deliberate ceremony, combining elements of bear body language with learned human gestures to create a farewell that spoke of gratitude, respect, and hope for future understanding between their species. The sun's final rays caught the ice crystals in their fur, creating halos of light that seemed to sanctify this extraordinary moment. The mother bear paused at the threshold, turned to Sarah one last time, and performed a sequence of movements that would later be interpreted as a complex message of thanks and future hope. Her eyes, filled with an intelligence that defied scientific explanation, held Sarah's gaze in a final moment of profound connection. The journey home for the mother bear and her cub became a testament to the extraordinary bond that had formed between species. As they stepped into the transformed wilderness, their departure was marked by a series of behaviors that would continue to challenge scientific understanding of wildlife intelligence. The mother bear paused at specific intervals, creating what appeared to be deliberate waypoints that would allow Sarah to document their safe passage. The landscape they traversed had been dramatically altered by the historic storm. Massive snowdrifts created natural sculptures, and ice-encrusted trees sparkled like crystal formations in the emerging moonlight. The mother bear's navigation through this changed terrain displayed a level of environmental awareness that went beyond mere instinct. She would test the stability of snow bridges, create safe passages for her cub, and frequently look back to ensure Sarah could document their journey from her cabin's vantage point. Sarah's professional cameras, equipped with powerful zoom lenses, captured moments that would later become cornerstone evidence in studies of animal intelligence. The mother bear would pause at clearings, position herself and her cub in perfect light, and perform what appeared to be deliberate demonstrations of their recovery story. She would show how the cub's strength had returned, how their bond had evolved, and most remarkably, how they had developed new ways of communicating that combined bear and human elements. The cub's participation in this documented journey showed remarkable development. It would stop at natural platforms, fallen logs or rock outcroppings, and demonstrate its restored agility and strength. These weren't random displays. They appeared to be conscious efforts to show the success of their extraordinary encounter with human help. Each demonstration was followed by a pause, allowing Sarah's cameras to capture every detail. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the mother bear began what appeared to be a series of teaching moments for other wildlife they encountered. When a young moose watched them curiously from a safe distance, the mother bear demonstrated non-threatening body language, then guided her cub to do the same. This wasn't just animal interaction. This was active teaching of peaceful coexistence. The most extraordinary moment came when they reached what appeared to be a natural gathering place for wildlife. The mother bear positioned herself in a clearing where several animal trails converged and began what looked like a deliberate sharing of their story. Through a series of gestures and movements, she appeared to be communicating their experience to other forest creatures that had gathered at a respectful distance. Sarah's satellite phone had begun receiving clear signals again, and she used it to document their departure with time-stamped photographs. The mother bear's awareness of this documentation showed remarkable sophistication. She would pause their journey at regular intervals, create clear lines of sight for photography, and even adjust her position based on lighting conditions. Behaviors that suggested an understanding of human documentation needs. The cub's recovery had progressed to the point where it could navigate the challenging terrain with confidence. But what made its journey remarkable was how it would frequently turn to face Sarah's cabin, performing what appeared to be deliberate gestures of gratitude. These weren't random movements. They showed clear intention and understanding of the significance of their shared experience. As they approached what appeared to be their home territory, the mother bear initiated what would become the most studied sequence of wildlife behavior ever recorded. She began marking trees in patterns that seemed to tell their story, not random claw marks, but deliberate symbols that appeared to represent their journey from crisis to recovery. The moonlight created natural spotlights through the forest canopy, illuminating moments that seemed choreographed by nature itself. The mother bear would pause in these light beams, create what appeared to be intentional poses with her cub, then wait for Sarah's cameras to capture these moments. This wasn't just animal behavior, this was conscious participation in documenting their historic encounter. Their journey took them past other bear dens, and at each one, the mother bear would pause to demonstrate what appeared to be a new form of communication. She would make specific sounds and gestures that seemed to tell their story of human interaction, creating what felt like an oral tradition that could be passed through the bear community. The sophistication of this behavior suggested a level of social learning and information sharing previously thought impossible in wild animals. The cub's role in these demonstrations showed remarkable development. It would add its own elements to their story sharing, showing other bears how it had learned to trust, how it had recovered, and most remarkably, how it had developed new ways of understanding across species boundaries. These weren't just learned behaviors. They showed independent thought and conscious choice in communication. As they ventured further into their territory, the mother bear began what appeared to be a mapping exercise. She would stop at significant landmarks, create distinct markers, and guide her cub through what looked like a memorization process. This wasn't just navigation. This was the creation of a documented trail that could potentially help other bears in need find their way to human assistance. Sarah's wildlife expertise allowed her to recognize signs of their approaching den site. But what she witnessed next defied all professional knowledge. The mother bear began preparing the area around their den with what appeared to be deliberate modifications to make it more visible from the air, clearing specific patterns in the snow and marking trees in ways that could help rescue teams locate them if needed. The final leg of their journey became a masterclass in wildlife intelligence. The mother bear demonstrated sophisticated problem-solving skills, creating safe passages through deep snow, testing ice thickness over streams, and showing her cub how to recognize and remember human-safe zones versus wild-only territories. This wasn't just survival training. This was the establishment of a new framework for human-wildlife coexistence. As they neared their den, the mother bear orchestrated what appeared to be a final documentation sequence. She guided her cub through a series of movements that seemed to summarize their entire journey, from desperate arrival at Sarah's cabin to their triumphant return home. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and seemed designed to be captured and studied by future generations of both species. The moonlight cast long shadows across the snow as they approached their final destination. The mother bear's behavior suggested not just a return home, but the establishment of a new chapter in human-wildlife relations. She began marking the area around their den with symbols that appeared to combine traditional bear markings with elements of human communication, creating a hybrid language that could bridge the gap between their worlds. The cub's participation in these final moments showed remarkable sophistication. It would add its own marks alongside its mother's, creating what appeared to be a young bear's perspective on their extraordinary journey. These weren't just imitative behaviors, they showed independent thought and a clear understanding of the significance of documenting their experience. The impact of Sarah's extraordinary encounter with the mother bear and her cub began to ripple through the scientific community with unprecedented force. Her detailed photographs and video documentation captured with professional precision, provided evidence that would challenge and transform humanity's understanding of wildlife consciousness. The story of this remarkable interaction spread rapidly, capturing the attention of leading researchers, wildlife experts, and conservation specialists worldwide. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a prominent animal behaviorist from the University of California, was the first to arrive at Sarah's cabin once weather conditions permitted travel. The scientist's initial skepticism melted away as she reviewed the extensive documentation. What caught her attention wasn't just the bears' unusual behavior, but the systematic way they had developed new forms of communication specifically adapted for human interaction. The examination of the bear's departure trail revealed even more groundbreaking discoveries. The deliberate markings they had left behind showed evidence of symbolic thinking far beyond what science had previously attributed to wild animals. Each marking appeared to be part of a larger communication system, suggesting a level of cognitive sophistication that would force researchers to reconsider their fundamental understanding of animal intelligence. Sarah's cabin itself had become a living laboratory. The areas where the bears had stayed showed signs of conscious consideration for human space that defied explanation. The careful arrangement of objects, the deliberate cleaning of their resting area, and the symbolic tokens they had left behind suggested not just intelligence, but a deep understanding of human social customs. The wildlife research community was particularly fascinated by the video footage showing the mother bear's teaching methods. Her systematic approach to instructing her cub in both traditional bear behavior and new human interaction skills suggested a level of metacognition previously thought impossible in non-human species. The footage showed clear evidence of planned instruction, assessment of learning, and adaptation of teaching methods based on the cub's responses. International media attention soon focused on the small Alaskan cabin where this extraordinary encounter had taken place. However, Sarah's professional approach to documentation and her respect for the bear's privacy helped ensure that the scientific significance of the event wasn't overshadowed by sensationalism. Her detailed notes and observations provided researchers with invaluable insights into the possibilities of meaningful human-wildlife communication. The most significant findings came from analysis of the bear's departure behavior. The mother bear's creation of what appeared to be intentional documentation points along their journey home suggested not just intelligence, but an understanding of human needs for verification and study. Each stopping point they had created showed evidence of deliberate positioning and careful consideration of lighting and camera angles. Conservation experts began studying the implications of this encounter for wildlife protection strategies. The mother bear's apparent ability to teach other animals about positive human interaction suggested possibilities for reducing human-wildlife conflicts in ways never before considered possible. Her creation of marked pathways leading to potential help could revolutionize wildlife rescue efforts. Dr. James Chen, a leading expert in animal cognition from Oxford University, spent several weeks studying the physical evidence left behind. His analysis of the bear's markings revealed patterns that suggested not just communication, but the beginnings of a proto-language that combined elements of bear and human symbolic systems. This hybrid communication method could potentially bridge the gap between species in unprecedented ways. The cubs demonstrated learning abilities particularly intrigued researchers. its rapid adaptation to human presence, development of complex communication skills, and apparent understanding of social boundaries suggested cognitive capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding of bear intelligence. The speed and sophistication of its learning process challenged existing theories about wildlife behavioral development. Sarah's detailed observations of the bear's cleaning behaviors provided new insights into animal understanding of human spaces. The mother bear's careful attention to maintaining the cabin's cleanliness, her teaching of spatial boundaries to her cub, and their joint efforts to minimize their impact on the human environment suggested levels of social awareness previously thought impossible in wild animals. The environmental science community began studying the implications of this encounter for climate change research. The mother bear's desperate seeking of human help during extreme weather conditions suggested that wildlife might be developing new strategies to cope with environmental challenges. Her apparent ability to communicate these strategies to other animals could have significant implications for understanding wildlife adaptation to changing climatic conditions. Local wildlife authorities implemented new protocols based on lessons learned from this encounter. The mother bear's creation of marked trails and communication points led to the establishment of wildlife assistance stations at strategic locations throughout the region. These stations would serve as safe contact points between humans and animals in need of assistance. The academic community's interest in the encounter led to the establishment of a new research center near Sarah's cabin. The facility focused on studying the potential for meaningful communication between humans and wildlife, using the documented interaction as a foundation for developing new approaches to human-wildlife relationships. Anthropologists began examining the implications of this encounter for our understanding of early human-animal interactions. The mother bear's demonstrated ability to create and teach new forms of communication suggested possibilities about how early humans might have developed cooperative relationships with other species. The development of new wildlife protection policies was heavily influenced by insights gained from this encounter. The bear's demonstrated ability to understand and respect human boundaries led to more nuanced approaches to managing human wildlife interfaces. Instead of focusing solely on separation, new strategies began incorporating possibilities for managed positive interactions. The scientific papers generated from studying this encounter challenged existing paradigms in multiple fields. The evidence of complex teaching behaviors, symbolic communication, and social awareness in wild bears forced researchers to reconsider fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness and intelligence. Sarah's photographic documentation became the cornerstone of a new approach to wildlife photography. Her images captured not just behavior, but evidence of conscious intention and emotional awareness in wild animals. This new perspective transformed wildlife photography from simple documentation to a tool for understanding animal consciousness. The mother bear's apparent ability to plan and execute complex social interactions led to new studies in animal cognition. Researchers began examining the possibility that other wild animals might possess similar capabilities for sophisticated social learning and adaptation. The most profound impact of Sarah's extraordinary encounter emerged 6 months later, during the following summer, when something remarkable began to unfold in the Alaskan wilderness. Reports started filtering in from across the region of bears, displaying unprecedented behaviors near human settlements. Instead of the typical cautious avoidance or occasional problematic encounters, these bears were exhibiting complex communication attempts that seemed directly inspired by the mother. Bears' teachings. A young park ranger named Michael Blackwood was the first to document this ripple effect. While patrolling a remote section of the national park, he encountered a female bear with 2 cubs who, instead of retreating, carefully approached his vehicle and began making deliberate gestures remarkably similar to those the mother bear had demonstrated at Sarah's cabin. The bear's movements showed clear intention to communicate without aggression, suggesting that the mother bear's new forms of interaction had somehow spread through the local bear population. Dr. Rodriguez's research team, which had established a permanent observation post near Sarah's cabin, began documenting what appeared to be an evolving system of bear-to-bear communication about human interaction. They observed bears teaching their cubs specific approaches to human structures, complete with the same careful attention to boundaries and respect for human space that the original mother bear had demonstrated. The transformation in wildlife. Behavior patterns extended beyond bears. Park officials reported instances of other wildlife species, moose, wolves, and even smaller mammals, displaying more sophisticated approaches to human contact. It seemed as though the mother bear's lessons in interspecies communication had sparked a broader evolution in wildlife-human interaction throughout the ecosystem. Sarah's own experiences continued to provide remarkable insights. During her regular photography expeditions, she began noticing subtle but significant changes in how wildlife responded to her presence. Animals would often pause to allow her to photograph them, sometimes even appearing to deliberately position themselves for better shots. This wasn't just coincidence. It suggested a growing understanding of human documentation activities. The scientific community's understanding of animal intelligence underwent a revolutionary shift as more evidence emerged. The bear's behavior demonstrated not just learning and adaptation, but the ability to transmit complex social knowledge across generations and even species boundaries. This challenged fundamental assumptions about the limitations of animal consciousness and cognitive capabilities. One particularly striking development came when Sarah discovered a series of marked trees near her cabin, each bearing symbols that appeared to be variations on the original mother bear's communication system. These markings, when mapped, revealed what seemed to be a network of safe routes and contact points between human and wildlife spaces, suggesting a level of organized information sharing previously thought impossible in wild animals. The impact on wildlife conservation practices was profound. Traditional approaches based on strict separation of human and wildlife spaces began giving way to more nuanced strategies that recognized the possibility of intelligent cooperation between species. The success of these new approaches led to dramatic reductions in human-wildlife conflicts across the region. Universities began establishing new research programs focused on interspecies communication, using the documented encounters as a foundation for developing systematic approaches to understanding and facilitating meaningful exchanges between humans and wildlife. These programs attracted scientists from diverse fields, creating unprecedented collaboration between disciplines. The transformation extended to public policy as well. Local and state governments began implementing new guidelines for wildlife management that incorporated insights from the bear encounters. These policies emphasize the potential for positive interaction while maintaining appropriate safety measures, creating a more balanced approach to human-wildlife coexistence. Sarah's photographic documentation became the centerpiece of a traveling exhibition that toured major museums worldwide. The images, accompanied by detailed scientific analysis, helped reshape public understanding of wildlife intelligence and consciousness. Viewers were particularly moved by sequences showing the deliberate teaching behaviors and emotional awareness displayed by the bears. Conservation organizations began incorporating these new insights into their educational programs. Instead of focusing solely on wildlife protection through separation, they began exploring ways to promote informed, respectful interaction between species. This new approach led to increased public support for conservation efforts and a deeper understanding of wildlife consciousness. The mother bear's influence continued to manifest in unexpected ways. Wildlife rescue operations reported increased success rates in their rehabilitation efforts, attributed to better understanding of animal intelligence and emotional awareness. The recognition that wild animals could comprehend and respond to human assistance led to more effective treatment and release protocols. Research teams studying the marked trails left by the bears discovered something extraordinary: the development of what appeared to be specific meeting points where animals could safely seek human assistance. These locations, carefully chosen and marked with distinct symbols, suggested a level of organized communication that transcended individual species boundaries. The impact on wildlife photography practices was revolutionary. Photographers worldwide began reporting similar experiences to Sarah's, where animals would appear to consciously participate in documentation efforts. This led to the development of new ethical guidelines for wildlife photography that recognized and respected animal awareness and agency. The scientific papers generated from ongoing research challenged long-held beliefs about the limitations of animal intelligence. Evidence of complex social learning, symbolic communication, and emotional awareness in wild animals forced a fundamental reconsideration of human-wildlife relationships. These findings influenced fields ranging from evolutionary biology to cognitive science. Perhaps the most significant development came in the form of new protocols for wildlife crisis response. The mother bear's successful seeking of human help during extreme weather led to the establishment of wildlife emergency stations throughout the region. These facilities were designed to provide safe points of contact between humans and animals in distress, incorporating lessons learned from the original encounter. The transformation in scientific understanding led to practical applications in wildlife management. Park rangers and wildlife officials began receiving training in recognizing and responding to deliberate communication attempts from wild animals. This new approach led to more successful interventions in wildlife emergencies and reduced conflicts in human-wildlife interface areas. The mother bear's teaching methods became a model for understanding animal cognition and learning. Researchers observed similar patterns of intentional instruction among other species, suggesting that sophisticated teaching behaviors might be more common in wildlife than previously believed. This insight led to new approaches in wildlife rehabilitation and release programs. 1 year after the extraordinary encounter, Sarah's cabin had become the epicenter of a revolutionary change in human-wildlife relationships. The transformation began manifesting in ways that even the most optimistic researchers hadn't anticipated. The mother bear and her cub, now strong and healthy, had become regular visitors to the area. But their visits weren't mere returns. They were actively participating in building a bridge between species. On a crisp autumn morning, Sarah witnessed something that would become the cornerstone of a new understanding of wildlife intelligence. The mother bear arrived with not just her own cub, but accompanied by 3 other bear families. Instead of showing anxiety or competition, these bears displayed coordinated behavior that suggested organized social learning. They took turns demonstrating the communication methods that had proven successful during the winter crisis, teaching their cubs, while other adults watched and added their own variations. The scientific community's attention shifted from merely studying the original encounter to documenting an emerging phenomenon of collaborative learning among wildlife. Dr. Rodriguez's team observed how the bears had developed a sophisticated system of markings around Sarah's cabin, not territorial warnings, but educational signs that seemed designed to teach other animals about safe human interaction. A breakthrough moment came when researchers discovered that the bears had created what appeared to be a training ground for young cubs several miles from Sarah's cabin. This natural classroom showed signs of deliberate organization: cleared areas for demonstration, marked paths showing different approach scenarios, and even what appeared to be practice zones for communication gestures. This development suggested levels of planning and social organization previously thought impossible. In wild animals, the impact extended beyond the bear community. Trail cameras captured footage of wolves, moose, and even smaller mammals observing and learning from the bears' demonstrations. This cross-species learning phenomenon challenged every existing theory about wildlife intelligence and social behavior. Animals that were traditionally adversaries in the wild were showing unprecedented cooperation in these learning zones. Sarah's photographic work during this period revealed patterns that researchers hadn't initially noticed. The animals weren't just learning human interaction, they were developing sophisticated methods of sharing information among themselves. Her images captured sequences of bears teaching wolves how to approach human areas safely, and these wolves later teaching their packs. The implications for understanding animal intelligence were staggering. The mother bear's original cub, now significantly grown, began displaying behaviors that suggested it was building upon its learned experiences. It would create new variations of the communication gestures, often combining elements of different species' natural behaviors to create more effective ways of interacting with humans. This innovation in communication suggested levels of creative thinking previously unattributed to wildlife. International wildlife organizations began implementing programs based on these observations. Instead of focusing solely on keeping wildlife away from human settlements, they started developing communication zones, designated areas where animals could safely initiate contact with humans when in need of assistance. These zones, marked with symbols similar to those the bears had created, showed promising results in reducing wildlife casualties during extreme weather events. The transformation in scientific understanding led to practical applications in wildlife conservation. Researchers developed new protocols for wildlife rescue operations, incorporating the recognition that animals might actively seek human assistance. This approach resulted in more successful interventions and better outcomes for animals in crisis situations. One of the most significant developments came from studying the bears' teaching methodologies. They displayed a sophisticated understanding of different learning styles, adapting their demonstrations based on the age and species of their audience. This observation led to new theories about cognitive development in wildlife and challenged assumptions about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear's influence continued to grow as she developed more complex methods of communication. She began incorporating elements of timing and sequence into her teachings, showing other animals how to approach humans at appropriate times and in appropriate ways. This temporal awareness suggested levels of planning and forethought previously unrecognized in wildlife. Sarah's cabin became the center of what researchers termed the Wildlife Communication Initiative, a groundbreaking project that studied and facilitated positive interactions between humans and animals. The program documented hundreds of successful interventions where animals actively sought human assistance during crises, using the communication methods they had learned. The impact on wildlife rehabilitation practices was profound. Recognition of animals' capacity for understanding and cooperation led to more effective treatment protocols. Rehabilitated animals showed higher survival rates after release, often demonstrating the ability to teach other wildlife about positive human interaction. Local communities began reporting unprecedented changes in wildlife behavior. Animals that had previously been considered problematic showed new patterns of respectful interaction. Bears would carefully avoid human food sources while still maintaining positive communication with local residents. This transformation suggested that the animals had developed a sophisticated understanding of appropriate boundaries. The mother bear's teaching extended to seasonal preparation. She began showing other animals how to prepare for severe weather events, including the identification of potential emergency shelters and human contact points. This forward-thinking behavior challenged existing theories about wildlife's capacity for planning and risk management. Educational institutions worldwide started incorporating these findings into their wildlife biology programs. The recognition of sophisticated teaching behaviors in wild animals led to new approaches in conservation education and wildlife management training. Students learned to recognize and respond to deliberate communication attempts from wildlife. The cub's development continued to provide new insights into wildlife intelligence. Now approaching maturity, it displayed innovation in problem-solving that built upon its learned experiences. It would create new methods of communication that combined innate bear behavior with learned human interaction patterns, suggesting a level of cognitive synthesis previously thought impossible in wildlife. The scientific understanding of animal consciousness underwent a fundamental shift. The documented evidence of planned teaching, innovative communication, and cross-species collaboration forced researchers to reconsider basic assumptions about wildlife intelligence. This new paradigm emphasized the potential for meaningful cooperation between humans and animals. The most profound impact came in the form of changed attitudes toward wildlife conservation. The recognition of animals as intelligent, conscious beings capable of sophisticated communication and cooperation led to more effective and compassionate conservation practices. Communities began viewing wildlife not as threats to be managed, but as potential partners in maintaining ecological balance. 15 months after the historic encounter, Sarah's discovery led to an unprecedented breakthrough in human-wildlife cooperation that would transform global conservation forever. On a misty morning in early spring, she witnessed an event that would become known as the Great Assembly, a gathering of wildlife that defied every known principle of animal behavior and territorial instinct. The morning began with an unusual silence settling over the Alaskan wilderness. Then, led by the original mother bear and her now adolescent cub, dozens of animals emerged from the forest: bears, wolves, moose, and even smaller mammals, moving together in what appeared to be an organized procession. They congregated in the clearing before Sarah's cabin, arranging themselves in what looked remarkably like a deliberate formation. What unfolded next would be studied by scientists for generations to come. The mother bear, now recognized as a pivotal figure in wildlife intelligence research, began what appeared to be a formal demonstration of advanced communication techniques. She moved through a series of gestures that combined elements from different species' natural behaviors, creating a new universal language of interspecies communication. The gathered animals participated in ways that suggested profound understanding and cooperation. Wolves would demonstrate variations of the signals adapted to their physical capabilities, while moose showed how larger animals could modify the gestures to maintain clear communication while ensuring human comfort. This collaborative development of communication methods suggested levels of social organization previously thought impossible in wild animals. Sarah's cameras captured extraordinary moments of cross-species teaching and learning. Young animals of different species would practice the communication methods together, with adult animals providing corrections and encouragement. This cooperative learning environment challenged every existing theory about competition and territory in wildlife behavior. The most remarkable development came when the assembled animals began demonstrating what appeared to be emergency response scenarios. They worked together to show how different species could collaborate during crises. Wolves demonstrating speed in carrying messages, bears showing strength in clearing paths, smaller animals displaying their ability to navigate tight spaces. This coordinated emergency response system suggested levels of planning and cooperation that revolutionized wildlife behavior science. Research teams studying the event documented unprecedented examples of animal problem-solving. The gathered wildlife would present various scenarios, from injury to environmental threats, and demonstrate different approaches to seeking human assistance. Each demonstration showed remarkable awareness of human social structures and boundaries. The mother bear's original cub, now growing into adulthood, emerged as a leader in these demonstrations. It had developed new variations of the communication methods, combining learned human interaction patterns with natural animal behaviors to create more effective ways of bridging the species gap. Its innovations suggested levels of creative thinking that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence. International wildlife organizations began implementing programs based on these observations. Instead of traditional wildlife management focused on separation, they developed cooperation zones where animals could safely initiate contact with humans when necessary. These zones, marked with symbols similar to those the animals had created, showed remarkable success in reducing wildlife casualties while promoting positive human-animal interaction. The scientific community's understanding of animal intelligence underwent a revolutionary shift. The documented evidence of planned teaching, innovative communication, and cross-species collaboration forced researchers to reconsider basic assumptions about wildlife consciousness. This new paradigm emphasized the potential for meaningful cooperation between humans and animals. One of the most significant revelations came from studying the animals' teaching methodologies. They displayed sophisticated understanding of different learning styles, adapting their demonstrations based on the age, species, and individual characteristics of their audience. This observation led to new theories about cognitive development in wildlife and challenged assumptions about the limitations of animal intelligence. The transformation in wildlife behavior extended to practical applications in conservation. Researchers developed new protocols for wildlife rescue operations, incorporating the recognition that animals might actively seek and coordinate assistance. This approach resulted in more successful interventions and better outcomes for animals. In crisis situations, local communities reported unprecedented changes in wildlife behavior. Animals that had previously been considered problematic showed new patterns of respectful interaction. Bears would carefully avoid human food sources while maintaining positive communication with local residents. This transformation suggested that the animals had developed a sophisticated understanding of appropriate boundaries. The impact on wildlife rehabilitation practices was profound. Recognition of animals' capacity for understanding and cooperation led to more effective treatment protocols. Rehabilitated animals showed higher survival rates after release, often demonstrating the ability to teach other wildlife about positive human interaction. Sarah's cabin became the center of what researchers termed the Interspecies Communication Initiative, a groundbreaking project that studied and facilitated positive interactions between humans and animals. The program documented hundreds of successful interventions where animals actively sought and coordinated human assistance during crises, using the communication methods they had learned. Educational institutions worldwide started incorporating these findings into their wildlife biology programs. The recognition of sophisticated teaching behaviors in wild animals led to new approaches in conservation education and wildlife management training. Students learned to recognize and respond to deliberate communication attempts from wildlife. The most profound impact came in the form of changed attitudes toward wildlife conservation. The recognition of animals as intelligent, conscious beings, capable of sophisticated communication and cooperation, led to more effective and compassionate conservation practices. Communities began viewing wildlife not as threats to be managed, but as potential partners in maintaining ecological balance. The assembled animals' demonstrations of seasonal preparation showed remarkable foresight. They worked together to identify potential emergency shelters, create marked pathways to human contact points, and establish communication protocols for severe weather events. This forward-thinking behavior challenged existing theories about wildlife's capacity for planning and risk management. 2 years after the extraordinary encounter that changed our understanding of wildlife intelligence, Sarah Mitchell stood before an international audience at the United Nations Wildlife Conservation Summit. Her presentation wasn't just about the remarkable events that had unfolded in her remote Alaskan cabin. It was about the profound transformation in human-wildlife relationships that had spread across the globe. The conference hall fell silent as Sarah shared never-before-seen footage from that historic winter morning. The mother bear's desperate plea for help, her unprecedented display of trust, and the miraculous recovery of her cub moved many in the audience to tears. But it was what happened after their departure that truly captured the world's imagination. Through Sarah's expert lens, a story of extraordinary transformation emerged. The footage revealed how the mother bear and her cub had become teachers, sharing their knowledge of human interaction with other wildlife. Their methods showed remarkable sophistication, systematic instruction, planned demonstrations, and careful assessment of their students' progress. This wasn't just animal behavior. This was organized education that transcended species boundaries. The international community watched in amazement as Sarah's documentation showed the development of what scientists now called the wildlife network, a sophisticated system of communication and cooperation between different species. The footage captured extraordinary moments, wolves and bears working together to guide injured animals to human assistance, moose teaching their calves the safe approach signals developed by the bears, and smaller mammals acting as messengers. Between species, Sarah's presentation included groundbreaking research data from Dr. Rodriguez's team. Their studies had documented over 500 successful instances of wildlife seeking human assistance using the communication methods first demonstrated by the mother bear. These encounters had resulted in the saving of countless animal lives during extreme weather events, injuries, and other crises. The most compelling evidence came from satellite tracking data that revealed the extent of the wildlife communication network. The animals had established what appeared to be designated learning zones throughout the region, each marked with specific symbols that served as universal signals for different types of human-animal interaction. This sophisticated system of communication had spread far beyond Alaska, with similar behaviors being reported across North America. The summit's attention focused intensely on the footage of the mother bear's original cub, now fully grown. It had developed into what researchers termed a bridge species ambassador, actively working to expand the communication network to new areas and species. Its innovative approaches to teaching and problem-solving had revolutionized scientific understanding of animal intelligence. Sarah shared remarkable statistics about the transformation in human-wildlife conflicts. Regions that had implemented the new cooperation protocols reported dramatic decreases in negative encounters. Bears that had learned the communication methods were successfully teaching their cubs about appropriate boundaries, leading to an 87% reduction in property damage and human-wildlife conflicts. The presentation included testimonials from wildlife rescue workers worldwide who had witnessed the extraordinary change in animal behavior. They reported instances of injured animals actively seeking help using the learned signals, and even more remarkably, other animals guiding humans to those in need of assistance. This coordinated response system had dramatically improved survival rates for wildlife in crisis. The impact on conservation practices had been profound. Sarah's documentation showed how traditional wildlife management approaches were being transformed by the recognition of animals as intelligent, cooperative partners rather than subjects to be controlled. The new paradigm emphasized communication and mutual understanding, leading to more effective and humane conservation strategies. International wildlife organizations presented data showing the global impact of these discoveries. The communication methods first observed at Sarah's cabin had been adapted for use in wildlife preserves across different continents. Rangers reported successful implementations in African savannas, Asian forests, and South American rainforests, each region developing its own variations while maintaining the core principles of mutual respect and understanding. The scientific community's understanding of animal consciousness had undergone a revolutionary shift. Sarah's footage provided undeniable evidence of complex emotional awareness, sophisticated teaching abilities, and levels of social organization previously thought impossible in wild animals. This new perspective had led to fundamental changes in how humans approach wildlife conservation and management. The summit particularly focused on the mother bear's legacy in crisis response protocols. Her initial desperate plea for help had evolved into a sophisticated system for wildlife emergency management. Animals across different species had learned to recognize and communicate various types of crises, leading to more effective human intervention when needed. Sarah concluded her presentation with recent footage that brought the audience to their feet. It showed the mother bear, her now adult cub, and a diverse group of wildlife gathered at the original cabin site, demonstrating what appeared to be a graduation ceremony for young animals who had mastered the communication methods. This powerful symbol of interspecies cooperation and learning represented a new chapter in the relationship between humans and wildlife. The impact of Sarah's work extended beyond wildlife conservation. Educational institutions worldwide had begun incorporating these discoveries into their curricula, teaching future generations about the importance of understanding and cooperating with wildlife rather than merely managing it. This shift in perspective promised to create a more harmonious relationship between humans and the natural world. The United Nations Summit concluded with the establishment of the Global Wildlife Communication Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to implement these revolutionary approaches to human-wildlife interaction worldwide. Sarah's remote Alaskan cabin, where it all began, was designated as an international center for the study of animal intelligence and interspecies cooperation. As Sarah finished her presentation, a familiar sound drew everyone's attention to the conference hall's windows. There, carefully observing the proceedings, stood the mother bear and her grown cub, now teachers and ambassadors of a new era in human-wildlife relations. Their presence served as a powerful reminder that the greatest changes often begin with a single act of trust and compassion. The legacy of that desperate winter morning had grown far beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. It had sparked a global transformation in how humans understand and interact with wildlife, proving that when we open our hearts and minds to the intelligence and consciousness of other species, remarkable things become possible. The story of the mother bear and her cub had become more than just a tale of survival. It had become a blueprint for a new kind of relationship between humans and wildlife, one based on mutual understanding, respect, and cooperation. As Sarah looked out at the assembled world leaders and then back at the bears who had started it all, she knew that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary new chapter in the history of life on Earth. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.